Hebe Thorne. I am an associate solicitor at Burges Salmon. I am in the family team there and I qualified in September 2019. I chose to become a solicitor over a barrister because it seemed more stable. I also didn't have a law background, so I came from a non-law background, and it felt to me that perhaps barristers were maybe more law students that had gone straight through. It seemed to me that it was more consistent, more stable, and the cost of being a barrister felt a bit overwhelming. I think with hindsight, actually, there were a lot more options for being a barrister than maybe I was aware of, but actually I'm happy with my choice. I don't think I had as much legal experience as perhaps I thought I needed at the time. Again, not having a law background, I don't think I'd gone to some of the legal work experience opportunities that are afforded maybe to law students, so the moots and all of that. And that was something that I was worried about when I was applying. But actually what I've realised, and particularly now being quite far away from my application, the experience I had before was really helpful. So I've been working since I was 16, waitressing, coffee shops, big events, lots of the corporate events, and the skills that you learn in those events are really helpful. So actually management skills, efficiency, organisation, problem solving. I defy anyone to work in a corporate event and not know any of those skills. So actually lots of them were really applicable, and realising how I should apply those to my career was useful. In terms of legal experience, I did a few days, maybe a week, in a small law firm, which was interesting just to see actually what they do, and then did quite a lot of volunteering things. So it was called the PSU. I think it's now support through court. So volunteering in a courtroom setting for litigants in person that just needed someone there to help them through the process. And then also I did things like copy editing of the university newspaper and things that are not quite legal, but maybe a little bit more lending myself to that. I thought about what made my application successful, and I wondered if actually it was because I was just quite honest. I definitely, now I'm a bit older and have been doing this a while, you see lots of people, juniors, fact schemers, that are trying to present themselves how they think they're supposed to be presented. And I remember really clearly there was a question on in my application about what news story had interested me at the time. And I absolutely could have said something like, I think at the time it was the Paradise Papers, was the big tax scandal. Could have said something like that, but actually what I was interested in was the sugar tax, because I was selling cakes at the time, it was relevant. So actually I just tried to be a bit human in my application and reflect on the experience that you've got and stop trying to shoehorn yourself into what you think they want. Actually, they want a well-rounded person that they might want to work with. On a typical day-to-day, I suppose it depends whether I've got cases that are in ongoing proceedings. So if, say, for example, I had an ongoing case in proceedings, then there would be quite a lot of work preparing for an upcoming hearing, for example. So bundles, briefing counsel, perhaps call about strategy with counsel and the client, sort of supervising and supporting more junior lawyers to get that ready, speaking with more senior lawyers, so partners, about that, whilst also not ignoring my other clients. So perhaps I might also have, whilst in a large financial proceedings case, I might also have a client that's calling me because they're having an issue with picking up a child from school, and they need me to speak to the other solicitor or give them some advice about that. And I might also be drafting, say, a prenuptial agreement, so sort of drafting. So it's quite varied. And as with any case, but perhaps particularly private client, a client can call at any time, so your day can go like that with very little warning. I most enjoy how varied it is. So you never really know what's coming. So I might have an idea of what my plan for the day is. I might think I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then actually someone picks up the phone or you get an application and you sort of have to change your plan. I like being able to think on my feet, and every day is quite different. I feel quite privileged to be involved in people's lives when they're quite vulnerable. So actually they turn to you, they rely on you, and you guide them through that. And I think that's quite a privilege to be involved in. And it's generally really interesting. I think you have to know a little about a lot. So I have to be able to recognise pension issues, business issues. It's very broad what I do, perhaps broader than a lot of people think. I mentioned that clients are quite vulnerable, and that's quite a privilege, but actually also a vulnerable client can sometimes perhaps show that in different ways. So they might not always be that receptive to the advice you're giving them or that receptive to speaking to you. So sometimes having to deal with people's emotions secondhand can be quite draining, depending on sort of what else is going on. And again, the flip side of really liking how varied my days are, actually sometimes having your day derailed and your plans sort of that you had in place sort of thrown out the window can be quite challenging. And I think that is something that's taken me quite a long time to learn. Actually, you can have a to-do list and you can try your best to stick with your to-do list, but sometimes life happens and you just have to find a way to juggle and remanage it. And I think that's the case, not just in the area of law that I do, but I think in all areas of law. You just have to sort of go with the flow a bit more than I think people that are leaning towards legal careers are naturally able to do. So in terms of business development, I do quite a lot, I would say. That might be particularly due to the firm I'm at, also the area that I'm in. And I think perhaps one of the misconceptions that junior lawyers can have is that you can't get involved in business development. What can you, as sort of 2-3 years qualified, even a trainee, bring to the table? But actually, if you're building relationships now, then those can very feasibly have long-standing impacts in the future. So some of the best relationships and the sort of best funnels for work are those that have been going for years and years. So actually, I would go to networking events with other junior lawyers, go for lunch with a barrister, but actually it doesn't have to be as complicated as people think it is. Sometimes you can just send an email to someone that you maybe knew a few years ago and actually see that you've got some links. So it doesn't have to be these huge events, and I think just doing a little bit is useful. I would also say that the more senior I get, the more I realise that those little things do have a big impact. When I get an email from someone saying, saw this, thought of you, that has just as much impact as sort of the invitations to the big Christmas parties or whatever. Play to your strengths. If you're someone that loves chatting and loves presenting, then great. If you're someone that prefers to put yourself sort of on paper and get your name out that way, then that's great. Not everyone's going to be comfortable in all areas, and just be fine with that. I think to be a successful solicitor, you've got to be organised, hardworking, diligent, but I suppose these are all skills that most jobs need. I think you can be the most technically excellent lawyer ever, but if you can't explain what you're trying to do to a layman, then what's the point? So I may know a lot, but if I can't make someone else understand the technicalities, then that's a real issue. So I suppose it's communication skills and how to break that down for people. We've probably all heard the criticisms of lawyers talking jargon, and actually how can you take that to the next step? So I think that's a real skill that you learn over time, but you just need to sort of focus on and hone. The advice I'd give to aspiring lawyers, people doing training contracts, people doing the applications, is just keep an open mind. I know that when I was doing my training contract, and I see it now, people come with very firm ideas of what they want to do, the exact area of law that they want to work in, and actually doing it in practice is very different to studying it. So the black letter law is quite different to what you're actually doing in the real world. I have the same job title as someone who specialises in tax law, for example, and our jobs could not be further apart. So actually just come in with an open mind and you'll be surprised what you enjoy. I would say that one of the best things about Burges Salmon is its culture. It says it's a collaborative firm, and I suspect lots of firms say that, and it is the only place I've worked, but it really is. It's not that hierarchical. So in terms of the culture, I think there was an adjustment after COVID. I think all firms had to sort of shift, but we have lots of sports teams. So I used to run the firm hockey team. There's football, running, Pilates, all of that stuff. And again, there's sort of been a bit of a shift in the focus since COVID, and you can get involved in that. There's lots of firm-wide events. So we had, it used to be Strictly Come Dancing with all the partners involved. It then moved to the Masked Singer. So all of these sort of fun things, partners humiliate themselves for charity. And then we have our B groups. So they're sort of the groups championing diversity and inclusion. So their aim is for them to sort of promote, advance, maintain diversity and inclusion within the firm. So be balanced, be proud, be enabled and be cultured, which is actually they put on events, they educate, they get speakers in, sort of get those messages out there. And the idea being that people that aren't necessarily linked to those groups hear about them. So it's all well and good, for example, being a member of Be Balanced, which is about sort of gender inclusivity. As a woman, I might already have a vested interest in that, but actually it's getting men to be interested in that and understand sort of the messaging. So they're good at promoting all of that stuff, and they do put their money where their mouth is, and they do really sort of back the things that they say. Burges Salmon is an all-service firm, which is really good for me. So I think lots of the departments work quite closely together. So I did a seat when I was a trainee in corporate, and they had input from pensions team, employment team, banking team, tax team on big transactions. And I think it's easy to think that only that kind of work has the interaction, but actually what I do now, so say we've got a business owner that's splitting up from his wife, to be stereotypical, but the wife also is in the business, she's a director, she's a shareholder, then we might need some advice from employment about how to deal with her employment situation. We might need some tax advice about how to get her out of the business. We might need some corporate advice about restructuring that. So actually, even if it's just picking up the phone to someone in the other department and saying, is this something that I should be worried about? Just knowing the flags is really useful, and it sort of helps to have those links around the firm. So it's not sort of an island, and it's really positive to have that. I think client-facing opportunities for trainees do really vary. They depend on the area of the firm that you're in, they depend on perhaps your supervisor, they depend on sort of the work that's going on at the time. Some things might be very technical, very complicated. I know that when I was a trainee in the family department, I had loads of client exposure. I went to meetings, court hearings, I would take calls on my own. And I know when I've been a trainee supervisor, that's something I feel really strongly about. So I try and get trainees involved as much as possible. There may be some follow-up work for them to do, there may not be, but actually just sort of getting the exposure to that is really helpful. I would say that there is a direct link probably to how enthusiastic a trainee is, to how much client exposure they have. For example, say a compulsory seat, so litigation in my firm, I don't know what other firms have, and the trainees that perhaps were there slightly begrudgingly seemed to be surprised that they weren't necessarily getting the most interesting opportunities, and they may be doing perhaps more bundling than they would be going to meet a GC of a client. So I think there's an element of actually these people want to hear trainees are enthusiastic about their job, and that, it pays dividends. So the client exposure would vary on lots of things, but I think if you get out what you put in slightly. Before I was a trainee, or what I wish all trainees knew now, was that it is okay that you don't know everything. I think there's definitely an aspect of often trainees are quite high achieving people, and they don't like necessarily that they don't know everything. You are there to learn. It's in the name. You are training. It is fine to make mistakes. It is fine to ask questions. It is fine to not know everything. That's the whole point of it. If you know everything, then what's the point of your training contract? I'm still learning, partners are still learning. That's the whole point of it. So I wish someone had told me, and I wish trainees knew now, that it's okay to not know everything, or even anything.